I wanted to let everyone know that it is Manoj's birthday, so be especially kind to him today. In case you didn't see that already, this is exciting because it's the first time that I am knowingly interviewing someone on their birthday. Maybe it's happened before, but nobody told me. So, yes, happy birthday to you, Manoj. And next up, I want to give everyone a little bit of background on how this came to be. Uh, it was, I posted some kind of, what was it? I think it was, I can't remember what the exact article was, but it was some Salesforce blog post talking about Einstein and the ML infrastructure that they've set up. And right away, Manoj reached out and was like, "Oh yeah, I think you wrote on in the comments of that. You said if you have any questions on this, let me know. I'm part of the team that is working on that." And I was like, "Wow, that's pretty big, and we should probably get to know more." And being that Salesforce is very open about their engineering, that is really cool. So I'm excited to hear your story. And what we want to talk about today is this like the low latency predictions and how you can have multi-tenant infrastructure to support those low latency predictions. And the stat I think that you gave, let me see, what was it? I can't remember how many, but it's hundreds of thousands. I think in the blog post that I just read, which I'll throw in the chat right now, if anyone wants to go and read that afterwards, is like 900,000. Was it per minute or per second? I can't remember, but it's in the blog post. You all see it.
Yeah.
So, so it's a lot. That's all you need to know. It's a ton, and the scale is unreal. And of course, we can imagine as much. Salesforce is a gigantic company, and we all know now that Salesforce just bought Slack. So Manoj, maybe you can pull some strings and get us some free Slack in the community, huh?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right, man. Well, I'm going to hand it over to you. I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you for coming on your birthday, and yeah, I'm really excited to have you here and have you tell us about what's going on with the Salesforce Einstein, this low latency predictions setup and infrastructure that you got.
Yeah, thanks, Demetrius. I'm so glad that so many people are choosing me, listening to me over the new President Joe Biden. His their inaugural speech is actually on right now. So if you didn't know and you want to switch, I won't mind. Uh, so here I created a small presentation which I'm sharing. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah, cool. So
Yep.
we'll be talking about in the whole ecosystem of machine learning platform. We'll be talking about the serving part. How do we serve a large number of models and with low latency? So we are talking about the on-demand prediction part as opposed to batch. So first thing first, who am I? Demetrius already introduced me. Here are a few ways to reach out to me, and of course the Slack channel is probably the easiest and best way to reach out to me. So what are we going to talk about? This talk is actually very different than the rest of the talks that you would have seen on this in this forum. I will not be talking a lot about machine learning. I'll be talking a lot about engineering. Most of the talks that I have seen on this forum are machine learning focused, which is of course the center piece around the community, but this talk is about engineering. So I follow Alexei, and he's amazing. A couple of days ago, he posted this: machine learning engineering is 99% engineering and 1% machine learning, which I totally agree. And you'll get to see some of this in my presentation today as well. So little bit of the background of the system. So Salesforce has a platform called Einstein. And I mean, if you don't know about Salesforce, it's a company that provides CRM system, and it has like all ranging from all like big companies to small companies, like 2 to 300,000 other companies as their customers. And there are multiple different kinds of products, like to manage your sales leads, to manage your CRM data, to manage your customers, and all kind of marketing and customer service systems, all of that. And these systems have machine learning based intelligence built in at many places. Like, for example, when a company receives some kind of, let's say, service request from customers, there is intelligence built in that categorizes that service request automatically so it reaches to the intended person the fastest possible way instead of people being bouncing it around. So that's just one example of the machine learning where that intelligence is built in the product. So Salesforce Einstein platform supports all of those ML applications that are built into multiple Salesforce products. So combinedly, it powers billions of predictions per day.
Wow.
I think last time the estimate was done was about 80 billion predictions that we serve to the customers per day. And yeah, Demetrius was right when he was calculating around 900,000 predictions per second. So yeah, so this talk is about that Salesforce Einstein platform. How do we do it at that scale? And I don't need to tell this community. People know that these are the biggest areas within machine learning. Like you do feature engineering, then you have systems for model training, and then model serving. These are the big three pieces. If you squint your eyes around the architecture, and I'll just touch a little bit on each of them. So feature engineering, as you know, is about collecting data, cleaning it, filtering it, massaging all the data, and extracting features from the data, selecting the features, and then validating. And it's a loop that keeps going on until you figured out what are the right set of features for the problem that you're trying to solve. Then the next big piece comes is around model training. Using those selected features, you use either either just a notepad to run some kind of machine learning model training job, or you might have more sophisticated pipelines to do that training for you. Basically, the outcome is one or more models that come out of that training process. And then that's also another iterative process. The model goes through model validation, and if the scores are right, then you use that. That's the model that you use. If it's not, then you go through the training process. You tweak your data, you tweak your hyperparameters, and you retrain the model. And third, last but not the least, is once you have that model, how do you serve that model? How do you plug in that model into your applications to provide the real value to your customers, right? So we'll be focusing on that model serving, sometimes also known as inferencing, sometimes also known as prediction service, that part, because that's the team that I work in at Salesforce in the Einstein platform team. So here in this presentation, I actually prepared a few slides for our journey of how this prediction service or model inferencing service evolved over last 2 to 3 years. So we'll go through some of the requirements that were given to us and how we solved them over time. And feel free to interrupt if you have any question, because the slides are not that many. I actually plan to make it more conversational than just me presenting. So some of the requirements that were given to us was, of course, I mean, if you have a service, it should be able to use a model to be able to predict, right? The request should come from the application, and you should be able to invoke a model to be able to serve the prediction. Then, because Salesforce, like a lot of other companies, is a big organization. There are many different kind of applications that many different data scientists are building. They actually use multiple different kinds of machine learning frameworks. So like some people like to use TensorFlow, some people like to use PyTorch, and all of these frameworks, they have their strengths depending on what problem that you're solving. So if you want to have a platform that wants to serve all of those machine learning applications, this service needs to support multiple frameworks and of course multiple versions of those frameworks. Like if TensorFlow, there is an application that's built using TensorFlow 1.1 and a newer version 1.2 comes along. We don't want to restrict our data scientists to only using the older version, or we don't want to restrict them to always upgrade to the latest and greatest. We want to allow them to run multiple versions of the framework. And we'll talk about rest of the requirements as well later as we go along. So let's see how we got started. So in the beginning, this is what our whole architecture was of the prediction service, of the model serving. So we had a web service that was hosting a AutoML framework. So AutoML, there is a AutoML framework that Salesforce built and open source. It's called Transmogrify. It actually shines in the areas like if you have very small set of data, but you still want to do predictions. So in those areas it shines, and it has a lot of capabilities around data transformation and data cleanup in that area. So this was our prediction service. It was hosting an AutoML framework-based container, and whenever the applications would query for a prediction, it will send the they'll send the basically record input record, and we had an S3 based model store. So we were storing all our models in S3, and whenever the request comes in, this prediction service would download the model from S3 if it's not in memory already, and invoke the model and serve the prediction. And that basically serves the basic purpose to be able to predict the model, right? So with this, we were able to serve few applications that were running on AutoML framework. So checkbox, we were able to predict.
Just sorry to jump in, Manoj. I'm seeing a question here from Ron, and this is an awesome question, actually. Do you standardize on how many models are packaged on, do you standardize on how models are packaged in order to be served? And if so, what standards does Salesforce require and enforce for model packaging?
Yeah. So for serving purpose, we do not actually care about how models are packaged. It is up to the data scientists how they are training their model, how they're packaging, because ultimately this container that we are hosting, the AutoML or any framework container that we are hosting, it is the data scientists who know how to read that model back. So this service is just you can just call it a container hosting service at this point, and the container itself knows how to get the model and how to parse the model basically. So it was the responsibility of the data scientists. They can actually pack the model in whatever format they want because they are the ones who are ultimately reading it.
Awesome.
So yeah. Next thing that we had on our plate was how to support multiple frameworks, how to support AutoML along with TensorFlow and Keras and PyTorch, all of that. So we built a component called router, and it's a pretty simple kind of a service that looks at the request, incoming requests, depending on the application that this request is coming for. We had a map that allows us to basically figure out which kind of framework that request was targeting, and we would just forward the request to the appropriate container. And these containers, they work from the engineering perspective pretty much the same way. All of these interfaces, they were the same. We standardized that interface to be gRPC based, and they were all implementing the same interface. And for the model store part, like downloading the model from S3, loading them in memory for certain duration, all of these different containers, they were behaving the same way. So with
And
this router approach, we were able to support multiple frameworks.
yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, when you would have someone maybe on the data science team that would come to you and ask for support for something new, would it be easy to implement because of this style of architecture, or did you have to think about it? And is it like everything that's involved in TensorFlow you're able to bundle in this, or everything with like I'm thinking like, okay, maybe somebody wants to use PyTorch Lightning, or someone
Yeah,
wants to use like these, maybe something excuse me, more obscure. Is it easy
yeah,
to just throw that in there?
yeah. That's a good, very good question actually. So initially we started with providing some base containers that had all the like popular frameworks and their supporting libraries, like for example, TensorFlow and all the things that people like to use when they use TensorFlow. Something that our team thought would be a good fit. So all the other teams, they use those base containers, and if they wanted to use some obscure library, something else, they can actually evolve that container and add their libraries to our base container, or they can build their own container from scratch. Only thing that this prediction service cares about is the interface, right? The gRPC interface. If you implement it the way that we published, then you can bring in any container that you want.
Hmm.
And that interface is also is pretty simple actually. It just has a couple of methods, one that says load a particular model, other one that says serve this particular model, or predict using that model, and that's pretty much it. Then rest all is how that model loading is done, how that serving is done, is uh, can be totally customized based on the framework that you're using.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and actually, there are multiple different flavors of these containers that we are providing. One, this approach we were calling BYOC, bring your own container. But with the base containers, we also started supporting a flavor called BYOI. So we are publishing a Java interface and a Python interface. And if you don't want to actually create your own container, or you are happy with the base container, you can just implement that Java interface and plug it in. That's your like bring your own
Oh,
implementation as opposed to bringing your own whole container. And then another approach that we also support is bring your own service. Like if
hmm.
you, let's say you don't want to host your models or containers in, let's say, in this prediction service. Maybe you like hosting them in SageMaker, for example, or Google Cloud Platform. You can still host it wherever you want. But if you want to plug in to this prediction service so that it can be used by rest of the components or rest of the applications in Salesforce ecosystem, you can do that as well. You have to just implement that gRPC interface that we are supporting. So
Wow.
there are multiple flavors of this. And then we extended the same approach to support multiple versions of the same framework. So like if somebody was using AutoML 1.1, 2.0, you can create like appropriate containers for that. And we would just simply route the request to whatever uh, framework and the version maps to the application that you onboarded on this service. So with this, we were able to just support multiple frameworks and versions. And as you can see, we were kind of just still starting, even though like it was supporting multiple frameworks and versions, and it was starting to host a lot of models. I'll actually take a divergence here and explain the model scaling problem. So typically, like in other companies, wherever I have worked, for a big complex system, let's say for search, for example, you you tend to use like multiple models. Maybe like you're using one model to or few models to to run query understanding, or a few models to do your relevance ranking at the end of it. So to solve a particular problem, there are like anywhere from a handful to, let's say, just to be safe, let's say 100, less than 100 models that companies support. Like all the use cases that you think of, let's say Netflix movie recommendation service, or Amazon product recommendation, all of those things, they're built for en masse, right? If you build the capability once, it's used by all the customers. So the number of models that those systems support are like less than 100 models, let's say. Here in Salesforce, um, because we host data for all of our clients, and there are like anywhere from 2 to 300,000 clients, and then there are on about tens of different products, and within each product there are many different machine learning applications that are built in. So if you do the math, for each application, for each tenant, there are like literally hundreds of thousands of models that we are dealing with. We are actually we do train models for each tenant, for each application separately, because data separation is paramount, right? We cannot mix customer data, and also we cannot benefit another customer from the intelligence that we have gathered from one customer's data, right? So the scale is actually very important, as opposed to other big applications where scale means number of requests per second that they serve. Here in Salesforce, the scale also means how many models that you are serving from your services. So and that is actually mind blowing.
One, I just want to jump in real quick, and this was back on the last section. There was a question around what the letters TRPC stand for.
Oh, I meant gRPC. So Google came up with Google Remote Procedure Call, a framework that allows you to communicate across systems, just like web services. So as opposed to REST and HTTP, the gRPC is a binary protocol, and it's more efficient.
Perfect.
So now let's go to the next set of problems. So multiple frameworks version, that's fine. But now when you are training models, just training model once and serving that is not sufficient. The customer's data keep changing. So you are supposed to keep retraining that model on some periodic basis, maybe every week, maybe once every month or something like that. So you keep collecting multiple versions of the same model. And that model version also, it's not that you always are serving the latest version. You want to maybe deploy the latest version gradually. Initially, maybe you just want to test out the new model only on 1% of the requests or 5% of the requests. And then once you prove that the new model is actually serving better than the previous version, then you want to roll out that version for all the requests. So for that reason, we were supposed to support multiple versions of each of the models as well. So to support that, we added another component, which is version management component. So this version management service, it was keeping track of all the models that we were deploying in S3, and all the associated metadata along with those models. So it keeps track of like the data lineage, what data sets and what versions of those data sets were used to train that particular model, and what machine learning, what framework versions were used to train that model, so we can use the same version to serve those models. So, and this version management service also keeps track of the gradual rollout. So if I just train the model and I just want to serve this model, this new version, only for a sliver of the request coming in. So if I go ask this version management service for this given request, tell me what version do I use, it will only give that new version to only a sliver of the request, but for the rest of the request, it will keep giving the older version. And once the data scientists, they're confident and they want to roll out to all the requests, then this version management service will start giving out the newer version for all the requests. So those are the knobs that you can control. And we use that for canary deployments, we use that for A/B testing, multiple purposes.
And on that
So,
version management system, I
hmm?
guess it's just all the metadata is like the metadata of the data that the model was trained on. Is that also saved in there?
Yes, so, yeah, metadata of the data that the model was trained on, and metadata about the model. Yeah, all of that is saved here. Yeah. So with this version management system, now our prediction service can actually support multiple versions of the models that are being run on multiple ML frameworks and multiple frameworks versions as well. So, and of course, we were doing it at scale. So each of these components, we are running multiple instances of each of these services.
And
Mhm.
along that metadata thing, there is a question like, can you break down how that goes for me as a data scientist? Maybe if I want to go and explore a certain model that isn't mine, do I go digging around in a database or do I just have a unique ID for the model? And is it in a README doc or
Yeah.
how can, okay.
So yeah, so actually there is a data lake that we have built, and I think that's a topic for another presentation. I can bring in
Yeah.
some of the
Actually, I
from
was
that
just
area.
reading about that. That's funny you say that.
Yes.
That was, oh, it seems amazing. I'll
Yeah.
link to that and now in the chat too for anybody who wants to look at it.
Yeah. So that data lake keeps track of multiple data sets and their lineages. This version management system in the metadata for each model, it references the data sets that were used to train the model. And that reference goes back to the data lake. So if you want to look at the actual data and how that, let's say, the feature was calculated or created based on the raw data, all of that data lineage you can get from the data lake.
Perfect.
So with this, we can support all of these multiple versions. Now, I think the fun part of the talk starts. How do we do it at scale and at low latency? So low latency, I think caching is the answer to a lot of problems in computer science. Uh, so that's what we use here. So whenever we were talking to any service like version management service, we put a distributed cache in place. And for models, when we were downloading the models, so instead of downloading them from S3 every time, we actually created a shared file store, and all the models would first get downloaded to that file store, and then all the containers, they would load them in memory on demand from file store. And this in-memory cache is of course limited. So the models were evicted on least recently used basis. And whenever any request comes in, if the model is still in the memory, it was served from that from memory. If the model is not, then it was loaded from file store. And if it's still not in the file store, then it was loaded from S3. So there were multiple levels of caching done to serve the models at low latency. we still had the problem of cold start. Like if a brand new model, a request for a brand new model comes in, we had to actually hydrate all of these caches before we could serve that request. So that problem is still there, and it's still acceptable because based on the systems that we are supporting. So now, how do you scale for the number of models? That is actually, I would say, the problem that we are still solving to some extent. But let me just go to the next slide. How do we solve it? So solving for requests per second, like if you are receiving, if let's say using one container, you're able to serve, let's say 100 requests per second. And if you have to serve 1000 requests per second, you can deploy 10 containers. And if your load balancer is doing the right job to balance the load equally, you can scale for requests per second without much trouble, right? But the other set of problem is how do you serve that many number of models that we are having to solve? So for that, let's just look at one particular cluster instead of looking at all of them, and let's divide this up. So if we let's say we have 3 containers and it's serving just one particular framework, one particular version of it, and it's caching all of that. So let's consider just this part. Uh, if we receive that request from different customers for their models, and this load balancer is sending the load equally, then what it means is that each of these containers are loading the customer's models in memory. Basically, all of them have the same copy of the models. So with that, you can only grow up to the limit, uh, like to as many models any particular container can load in memory. For small number of models, for small size models, that maybe that number could be like a few thousand models. But if you have big models of like hundreds of MBs of size or even bigger, then you cannot go. You cannot serve a lot of models from the same container. So um, first thing first that we did was to support like number of requests. We actually replicated these containers, and we also sharded the request to go to a particular subset of the container to be served. So let's say we had 10 customers. I'm just using that number 10 just for the ease of explaining. I can easily divide that 10 into these 3 set of serving containers. I can say that requests from 3 customers will go to this set, requests from next 3 will go to that set, and requests for the rest of them will go to this third set. So now all of these containers will load models only for the like that sharded set of customers. Only 3 customers, and we don't. Every container doesn't have to load all the models that we have in the system, right? So by sharding the request and with replication, we can actually serve a lot of models from memory than we were able to do before without sharding. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm seeing a question coming through here, and I've got a few of my own after this, but I'll ask the first one from Rakesh. What would you do to speed up transformation code run before scoring?
So transformation actually, as of as of this architecture, we were not even supporting transformations before the before scoring. I mean, I'll talk about that. I can talk about that in like in the later slides. But now, when we do support pre-processing and post-processing, those are also run as in separate containers. And then this router component becomes more of an orchestrator where it sends the request to a pre-processor, and then it sends a request for actual model scoring, and then it sends a request for post-processor. And Each of these pre-processor and post-processors are also like uh, like a cluster of containers. So that's what actually, so we run pre-processing and post-processing same way that we run and scale model scoring.
Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, yeah. So this sharding, I have to touch on this again. So we were doing the sharding based on consistent hashing algorithm. So for a given customer, their request will always get sent to one particular set of containers. So so there is a like good likelihood that their model would be in memory already on that set of containers. So that worked to a large extent. But then at the scale that we are supporting, we started seeing some more or different kind of problems. So when we were serving using that architecture, we started seeing a problem of noisy neighbors because we were sharding a set of customers to go to a set of containers always.
Yeah.
Now, if let's say there is a big customers that is actually sending thousands of requests per second, and they are keeping the systems engaged, the other customers who's not their load is not that heavy, they would see unwanted latency in their model prediction requests because their models will always get evicted because of not being used that frequently. So that was a problem that we were seeing.
Hmm.
Another one was hotspots. So if let's say a particular customer or few busy customers were actually, let's say, slotted into one set of containers, then those containers were always very busy while other containers were sitting idle. So those are the problems that we started seeing. And the way we solved them were uh, using something called shuffle sharding. So instead of using consistent hashing, shuffle sharding is another technique that actually shards some models or shards any resources across a set of containers or across another set of resources in a more distributed fashion or in a more random fashion, basically. So there is a very nice article in AWS builder library, yeah, about shuffle sharding, and they also have a open source library for to do shuffle sharding. So basically, the gist of shuffle sharding is that if you are sharding, let's say I have these 9 containers. Out of these 9 containers, if I'm let's say sharding 100 models with let's say three replicas of each of them, then the chances of uh, same models sharing the same host all the time, that actually reduces to basically to zero or as few as less as possible, as opposed to uh, consistent hashing where it's always kind of 100% guaranteed that all the same set of models will always share the same set of hosts. The
Sorry, Manoj. I laugh at that because it sounds like this name shuffle sharding could be the next hot TikTok dance. So
yes.
if anybody out there wants to go and make that dance happen, I promise I will retweet and share it on every kind of social media that I have.
Yeah.
The shuffle shard. And just another quick one to interrupt from Ron again. This is another great question. With so many models, there could be redundant models, and that's something that I didn't even think of. And then when you mentioned it,
Yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, how do you deal with that? Or was that
Yeah.
not even a problem? And then the follow up to that is if all the Salesforce models can be categorized into different model types based on what they provide, what would some of the big model categories be, and what's the biggest?
Yeah. Yeah. That both good questions actually. So redundant models are basically models that you train, but they were never, they don't get used as much or never used for prediction. They are not a problem for the prediction service. I mean, they take S3 space, that's all. But because we have this on-demand loading of the models in memory, whenever the request comes in, only then we load them in memory. So if there is a redundant model that never get used, that will never get loaded in memory. And then this, when we load them in memory, the memory cache also has this eviction policy. So whenever the cache gets filled, the least recently used models get evicted. So if a model is very seldomly used, they probably will not stay in memory for long. Other question that you asked was what types of models, what are the biggest types, what are the biggest categories, and what is the biggest of them all? So there are actually, I would say, 3 or 4 big applications that I know of. So one is called case classification. I alluded earlier, like when a new customer service case comes up, we have a ML application that classifies that case into like the right kind of case, whether it's, let's say, a refund request or if it's a broken part or things like that, right? Depending on the customer's use case. I think that's probably the biggest category of use cases that we support. Then we have another big category of lead scoring. So when customers record all their marketing leads or their sales leads, and they want to score which of them is likely to convert into the actual sale. So there is a application, ML application that creates that score, that evaluates that score. That is another big category of models that we see. We recently started supporting a product called Recommendation Builder. So customers can build like LinkedIn kind of recommendations where you can recommend jobs to candidates or candidates to job postings. And also based on the recommendations, we also support something called NBA, next best action. So whenever customer, let's say any customer case is presented to the customer service representative, they are suggested some next best action based on that recommendation system that we have built. So recommendation is another big category of models that we support. And recommendation is special because those models are very big in size compared to other models. Other models are mostly like either AutoML based or like they use some kind of linear regression or like those are not that data heavy. While the recommendation systems they are based they are based on they index features within the model, so they tend to grow in size a lot.
Perfect.
So coming back to shuffle sharding, now shuffle sharding kind of solves both of our problems of hotspot and noisy neighbor, because now the models are more randomly distributed. The only downside to this is that now we have to maintain a configuration map. We need to maintain a map of which models are being loaded on which containers, and router actually have to look up into this config map to route the request to the appropriate container. So this is an additional component which is based on a product called HashiCorp Console, and we could have used like it's similar to Zookeeper, which people are more familiar with. But this serves the purpose. This actually helps us solve the hotspot and noisy neighbor problem. Then we actually took it one step further. We collect all the metrics of how busy a particular container is, how many models it's hosting, how many requests it's serving, and based on that, we keep tweaking this configuration map. So even though it might be the case that a particular container is serving 100 models, while the other one is serving only 20 models, but those 20 models are, let's say, are very heavily used. So the container is actually running very busy compared to the other container. So the distribution doesn't have to be always based on like equal number of models being served, but also the CPU and the memory and resources that the container is using. So there is that data that's also being feedback and making a decision in this config map, where should we send the request to.
That's super interesting to me. And so you're measuring those metrics of how many times these models are getting hit, or if there's some noisy neighbor situation happening. Are you
Yeah,
also monitoring just the model itself for drift and that kind of
yeah.
stuff?
Yes, that's a like very vast topic, I would say. We are doing that, of course. I mean, this is just the system metrics that I talked about, right? Number of percentage of CPU and memory and number of requests. But then there is whole another set of metrics and logs that we collect that are related to the models itself. So we have some baseline scores for each model, and then we keep collecting all of the scores as we predict. And we have a analytic system that keeps detecting if there is any drift that we see in the models. And it triggers retraining of the model if the drift actually grows beyond a certain threshold.
Uh, and so does that all deal with your team, or is that like distributed out and your team deals with mainly this kind of engineering stuff, and then another team will deal with the more machine learning concepts of it?
So, I mean, it's all part of the same ML platform, but uh, uh, my team, which deals with prediction service, does not deal with detecting the model drift and re-triggering the model training. We provide data for all the model scores, so another system can actually detect that drift, and another system can and it can trigger the retraining of the models.
Mm,
I mean,
that's
it's
fascinating.
yeah, and it's part of the same team, same uh, I would say ML platform,
Hmm.
but that's also yeah another very interesting area.
Amazing. And Peter's asking, do you track the quality of the data going into the models, and if it changes over time? I guess that would probably be more in the other side with the machine learning stuff.
That's a feature engineering part. So
Okay.
in the feature engineering, I mean, different customers that are using the same applications may have different qualities of the data. So yeah, when we are supporting AutoML, so AutoML is supposed to detect any like the data quality and filter out bad data automatically, as opposed to a data scientist figuring out for each customer basis, right? At the scale of like when you're building hundreds of thousands of models for a given application, that's not humanly possible. So AutoML framework actually that we use, Transmogrify, it supports detection of data quality and filtering out bad data, and sometimes like it also allows, depending on the application, uh, you can uh, you can impute data to improve the model quality.
Perfect. I want to let you finish, but I got all kinds of questions that I have. So go
Actually,
ahead and finish, and then I'll
actually,
throw some questions.
I'm actually all done.
Okay.
So these are all the requirements that I showed earlier and how we solved them. And yeah, I mean, this is the same slide that you have seen before and all my contact details. And yeah, that's all I had.
There we go. And you are also in the community Slack. So if
Yes.
anybody wants to reach out to you on there, he is on that. I'm wondering, do you ever think that this will be open sourced, or is it
Yes.
always going to be that you guys just make us all jealous?
That's a very good question. So we have actually uh, we have been driving an effort to make as many of these systems open source as possible. So I mentioned before, Transmogrify or AutoML framework is open source already. And we are actually in the process of making our prediction service, making our orchestration workflow and parts of the data lake. That those also open source. So yeah, we'll announce them in the Salesforce engineering blog whenever that happens. But yeah, that is definitely the intention.
Nice. All right. I think you just made a few people smile. So I see in here, how do you ensure different models created by different teams or data scientists uh, expose the same data in order to be analyzed? I guess this is more of like a how do you ensure access controls? And correct me if I'm wrong, Umesh. Is it like the who gets to see what data? Is that the what you're saying in here? And so it's let me just
So yeah, I mean, I think data separation and authentication, authorization is of course a big part of um, Salesforce system. I mean, depending on based on the like customers that we are serving, security is like the biggest thing. And if you go to that prediction service blog that you mentioned earlier, we have mentioned there is a section of security. So all the customers' data is kept separate, and each request is authenticated and is only authorized to invoke that customer's model. And same thing works for training as well. Whenever the training jobs are kicked in, even though like all these services and components, they are all shared, they are all multi-tenant, but they authenticate each request and only authorize the request to access the data that belongs to that customer.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see another question in here, and this was actually one of my questions because I saw that you're using Lambda. You're using AWS Lambda, right? And this might be a ridiculous question. I know a lot of people might say, well, come on, it's comparing apples to oranges. But the question in the chat is asking, are you running on Kubernetes or is it another orchestration engine? And I know that Salesforce does use Kubernetes for some things, but not for this, right?
No, it is actually all Kubernetes.
Oh, it is. Okay.
So yeah. So we run Kubernetes. We Lambda actually we use only for certain specific cases, but most of it is all Kubernetes. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Nice. All right. Well, I think, um, okay. So I'm seeing some clarification by Umesh, and just to make sure that we got this before we finish off, he is asking model output is analyzed to monitor for drift and all of these different pieces of the model performance. So, how is it ensured that different models expose the same information?
I see. Yeah. So I think that's a good question. So what I understood is Umesh is asking that how do we ensure that all the models expose the same kind of information to be analyzed for model drift, right? So that data that we expose is actually reported by by prediction service. So the schema of that data is actually decided by the prediction service. So all the data is always it always follows the same schema. The metrics data, I mean, and then the prediction service needs to know what fields are the score fields. So that is some configuration that we have in our prediction service that knows out of this prediction which one is the score field and what fields to report for metrics.
Mhm.
And so that ensures that the schema of all the metrics that we are reporting across multiple different models is consistent, and somebody can run the model drift analysis job in a consistent manner.
Amazing. Well, I think that's everything. I've been thoroughly impressed Manoj, this has been excellent. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this and talk to us on your birthday. Nonetheless, happy birthday to you. And
Thank you,
thank you,
Dimitri.
everyone, for joining in.
Thank you. I couldn't think of any better way to celebrate my birthday. Thank you.
That's awesome. That is so cool to hear. And so I know, Manoj, you were one of the lucky winners of a free TWIMLCon ticket. So go enjoy TWIMLCon, and we will be seeing everyone next week,
Yeah.
hopefully. We're going to be talking next week. Actually, Manoj, I'm going to be asking questions that you had for LAC, one of the
Oh, yeah.
writers of Machine Learning Design Systems book that came out just before the end of the year.
Yeah.
And
I have
Manoj,
that book right here. You can't
yeah.
see because of my background, maybe now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great book. Absolutely incredible book. And I want to go through quite a few of the design patterns that they talk about for ML ops. I think it's just, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So that's next week. Hopefully we will see you all there. And if not, you can catch all of the reruns on YouTube. And yeah, Manoj, again, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Demetrius. Looking forward to attending all the other upcoming events. Yeah.
All right. See you later.